Hand loaders, bullet casters, welcome back to my bench. Welcome back to our discussion where we are in part 2 of taking groove diameter measurements. If you haven't watched my last video, I highly recommend that you do because it's going to help to make so much more sense of what we're doing right here. Now, I gave a little bit of prep information and left one thing out though, so I'm going to go ahead and tell you now. Make sure your barrel's clean, folks. Don't go shoot your gun, take it home, and say, gee, let me do what Leadsmith did. No, clean that rascal first, folks. So, folks, just like I told you earlier, we want to use dead soft lead. Now, you see that little flat spot here? If we are using cast lead round balls that have, in fact, been cast, you're most likely going to see this little flat spot. A lot of our cap and ball shooters, they expect to see that unless they're shooting something that's swage from like Hornady or Spear. And what they will typically do is load these with the flat spot facing up to make sure that there is no doubt that they are getting complete contact around the circumference of the ball. We're going to do the same thing here. Not because we're cap and ball shooters, but because we want to follow the same concept of just simply making sure that we get the best impression of the groove diameter all the way around the circumference here. Now, I'm going to go ahead and try to start this off with this rubber mallet. I might end up using the steel hammer. 1, 2, 3. We're having pretty good luck. 4, 5, 6. We're almost there, folks. But I'm glad I got to use this solid rubber hammer because I don't like using a steel hammer if I can avoid it. I'm going to tighten her back up and raise her back up in here. I am going to use that steel hammer with this non-marring brass punch. Don't use steel, folks. Don't booger up your barrel. Just like I said when we were taking care of our cylinder throat measurements, there's no reason to damage your gun just by taking some simple measurements. Let's see here. The entry part is the hardest part. But once we have made it in completely, let's see if I can show you kind of what I got right here. We're almost complete. However, if you see that ball has kind of, it's swaged in there. All the lead is intact, but it's kind of skirted out around the edges. And that's the last bit that we're trying to get through the barrel. Let's see if I can put this back the way it's supposed to. All right, good, we can see. So I'm just going to take this through until I feel pretty confident that all the lead has made it in. And there it is, folks. It is all in. Now I want you to see me push this slug through. We might be able to get it all the way through by hand. I might have to tighten it. I'm about a ½ inch in there. That kind of gives you a little bit of reference up to where my fingernail is. So let's see, I'm pushing it right now and that's working really well. Now, while I'm doing this, I'm thinking about the barrel restriction that we discussed earlier, because if I have one, this little lead slug is going to tell me all about it. But so far, I'm pushing this thing all the way through by hand. It might have tightened up a smidge, but I still managed to get it all the way through by hand. Now, let's see if I can give you. Oh boy, I don't want to hurt your eyes, folks. I'll try to get you an up close of this on my mat. So here it is, folks. A little lead slug, and fortunately, I didn't have to use the big steel hammer. So that's a plus there. Those hammers, they just open opportunities for failure. And if I find an opportunity for failure, there's always a part of me that for some reason decides to take it. So I'm glad I didn't have to use it. So looking at this without any glare, it's not very hard to see how we have taken some pretty good impressions of our groove diameter. Now, as I said earlier, what we're getting is basically the inverse of what the barrel was. So what we have protruding here is actually recessed inside the gun. I'm sure you can pretty well understand that. So that makes it real easy for us to get a pretty good clean measurement of the grooves. The lands, we may also be able to measure. However, there's not much point in it. We can measure it, but I'm not going to. I've always done just fine by knowing the groove diameter. For you guys that are shooting, autoloaders and rifles, this is important as well. Now, what this groove diameter is going to help you understand is what bullet size you're using. And we had discussed bullet size already when we went over cylinder throats, and I told you what I settled on, which was a .432 bullet mold, and I did want a .432 sizing die. However, I tried the 431 because of availability issues, and it worked really well. And there was some spring back that occurred, so honestly, they didn't really stay at .431 in the first place. So what I want, if we're talking revolvers, is I want my groove diameter to match my throat diameter or be slightly smaller. And the reason why is simply because, like I keep saying, we need those gases to seal up. And if my groove diameter is larger than my bullet, what's going to happen? And what is our job as hand loaders of cast bullets? Our job is to keep the gas behind the bullet because that helps to keep the lead inside the bullet. And so I have with me now this slug inside my dial caliper, and I feel pretty good that I've got a good clean 430 thousandths of an inch groove diameter, which is actually slightly larger than the nominal. I think most of our hand loading manuals are going to show test barrels with a .429. So this is another good reason to know the measurements of your gun, and another reason why the test barrel in the book might not actually be a good representation of the barrel in your gun. So we have more lands and grooves, not just the one, so we're going to take another measurement. And what just happened here? We are now 430 thousandths, 31 thousandths of an inch. So we actually have some discrepancy in depth of our grooves. I come back here, I'm at a pretty clean 430, and as I continue around, there is some minor differences. Yeah, definitely I have one set of grooves, that is a thousandths over another set, maybe two. So fortunately, what we did see, if you recall from my throat measurements, is all my throats were 432 thousandths of an inch. So at the highest point that I've got on this slug is 431 thousandths. And I'm pretty confident that although I told you that I can only take a snapshot of the smallest section, as smooth as everything went through, I think that's probably a good overall representation. And at this point, all I can do is use the information that I have and make sure I have a bullet size that fits not only my throats, but also my barrel. So, hey, leadsmith, check this out. I have slugged my cylinder throats, I have slugged the barrel, and I've taken measurements, and lo and behold, I have found out that my groove diameter is larger than my throat diameter. What do? Number one, if it shoots fine and it's not giving you a problem, leave it alone, because something with your load and your alloy and all the tolerances and how they stack in the known universe have worked out for your gun. But for most of us, that's going to be a problem. We're going to end up building up all kinds of lead through the lands and grooves of our barrel. So one option that might be available to you is it could just be that your cylinder throats are a little bit undersized. Maybe they're on the bottom end of specification, and maybe your groove diameter is on the upper end. The way those tolerances stack can make things a little bit tricky for us as cast bullet shooters sometimes. Now, there are smiths out there who can remount your cylinder, the throats, in order to bring up that groove diameter. What you'll be able to then do is, unless something's really crazy, is you should be able to shoot bullets that fit the throat and swage down or just seal up right there inside the bore, the barrel. Now, we may end up finding that we're sending bullets that are oversized through our barrel. And we did have a discussion about that not too long ago. And I harped on the concept of using a bullet that is over the diameter of the cylinder throat. And for good reason. Remember, these two pieces in a revolver are separate. They don't even function together very well most of the time, but they function good enough, okay? Unless we're using some really high-end revolvers. And so the action of an oversized bullet pounding its way through the cylinder throat can really cause some damage to our guns in the long run. We'll end up having fore and aft play in the cylinder, which can lead to light primer strikes. We can damage forcing cone. It can get bad enough that the cylinder won't even stay locked in position. Hopefully you catch this problem before it gets that far. But yes, it can happen. However, once the bullet makes it into this barrel, although the barrel is also separate from the frame, it is assembled together and it is designed to act as one solid piece. And we can run oversized bullets through this barrel all day long. The important thing is that our throat diameter is either the same as our groove diameter or a little bit higher. Folks, regardless of whether we're loading for revolvers, for our beloved M1911 type pistols and their counterparts that auto load, or we're loading for bolt action rifles, automatic, semi-automatic rifles, it doesn't matter, folks. Everything that we have discussed throughout this series applies here in some form or fashion. And more specifically, this last section, the last two videos, folks, every one of these firearms has a groove diameter. 2 of 3 of these firearms have a throat. And they all have something that is going to be relevant to us in the series that we watched. Now, there is one problem that we have sometimes, and once we come up with the ideal bullet diameter, maybe even a perfect hardness if you want to go down that route, there are some things in our hand loading practices that need to be addressed, because we can start with a perfect bullet, but by the time we have completed loading it, we have altered that bullet. Folks, how do I know that all of my hard work here that I've done to determine the correct bullet size didn't end up resulting in complete failure during the hand loading process? And that is something that we're going to be going over next. We also need to do a little bit of shooting. It's Leadsmith. It's about time to put your mouth where your money is. So that's what we're going to be doing next. And we will start our session, start our next part of this series on hand loading techniques. So friends, like and subscribe, because I'm looking forward to seeing you again.